you step outside of the United States and you really truly understand that it's a big world out there. And
Mm.
as one of our members put it to me one time, that blue passport, is both an opening of doors to opportunities, and it also puts at times a target on your back.
Hello and welcome to Erich McElroy's American Exchange with me, Erich McElroy. Well, thank you for tuning in to the podcast today or watching on YouTube, wherever you're watching or listening or doing all of those things. I'm very excited this week, as I am every week. I get excited every week, which even though I've lived in the UK for 24 years, I still get American excitement every now and then. To welcome Kristin Wolfe to the show. She is the chairperson of Democrats Abroad UK, and she has been living in the UK for many, many years and is going to be stepping down from that role in just a few weeks' time. But she's been the chair through the process of the election. And so we get a chance to talk about what Democrats Abroad does, what the role of it is, why Americans are engaged overseas, and what we can do. Because if you're an American overseas, or if you know American overseas, you have a right to vote. So we talk about some of the issues that matter to Democrats abroad, how we're going to go forward because they're electing a new chairperson for the Democratic National Committee in the next few weeks, and what might be the direction of travel for Democrats from there. So it's a brilliant conversation. She's a great person to talk to and really informative about the issues facing the party and facing people who live overseas. And also we talk about the websites, Democrats Abroad, where you can check out Democrats abroad in your country, not just the UK, and also votefromabroad.org, where, as an American, you can register to vote. So it's great to talk to Kristin. Please enjoy. Oh, and if you're watching this on YouTube, of course, you can like and subscribe because we are trying to grow the channel because it's much nicer to look at us and listen to us. Listening is great, but looking is better. I'm not really sure. Anyway, here is Kristin Wolfe. I'm very excited to welcome to the podcast today Kristin Wolfe, who is the chairperson of Democrats Abroad UK. And I found out just before we were getting started, this is your first ever podcast. So I
It
feel
is.
blessed and honored to have you here. The pressure's on.
No, no, I feel blessed and honored that you invited me. So I'm excited to be here, Eric. It's a big day, and I think this will be hopefully informative for people who are curious about what we as Democrats abroad do. And yeah,
Yeah. Well, apparently, the lesson that we learned in this battle over the democracy and the future of the United States and the free world is that Democrats didn't go on enough podcasts, and that was the main problem. So I think today will be the beginning of the journey that will rectify the future of America. Is that
anything we can
understated?
do to get that started, then let's just go because I'm ready to rectify.
Yeah, ready to rectify. I like that as a slogan. So before we go too far into it, I obviously know about Democrats abroad because I've lived abroad and been a Democrat for some time. What is the elevator pitch explanation of what a Democrat abroad is and what the organization is?
Sure. So Democrats Abroad is actually an official part of the Democratic Party, but because, as the name suggests, the Americans that are members live abroad. So we don't live
Hmm.
in the US, and our organization represents Americans living in over 180 countries around the world. And Democrats Abroad UK, which is the country committee that I'm the chair of, is the largest of the country committees that make up Democrats Abroad.
Hmm.
But we are just like every other state party in that, I'm from the state of Wisconsin, so there's a Wisconsin Democratic Party or a New York State Democratic Party. Democrats Abroad is considered an official state party for, as I said, Americans living overseas.
Yeah.
And that's important because it makes us different to what you may also hear from time to time is another organization called Republicans Overseas, which is not an
Hmm.
official part of the Republican Party. And unlike our members, where we represent our membership before the Democratic National Committee and we get to vote on policy and party platform, Republicans Overseas does none of that.
Yeah.
So, and our main mission is to get Democrats elected, up and down the
Hmm.
ticket and in every state in the country. And because we draw our members from every state in the country, our organization is, I like to characterize as the stealth group of voters. And we help to work to find those voters and to help them understand how they have to go through the process of registering to vote and then actually
Yeah.
casting your vote when those major elections come along.
Okay. I mean that it's exciting to be. I've enjoyed being part of it, and I do love the fact that it's so on brand that the Republicans A don't officially recognize their own organization outside the U.S. because they're in a foreign country, and B are essentially the organization is a for-profit company registered. I mean that's very on brand for Republicans. I guess it fits with their motif.
It does. And, but it's interesting because they try to pitch themselves as being more like Democrats abroad, where they are
Mm,
official representatives of the Republican Party. And I just like to call them a group of Republicans that gets together,
yeah,
who raise a lot of money for Republican candidates and who try and push out Republican messaging. And we saw that throughout the entire 2024 election cycle.
yeah,
And, they're on message and they're out raising money for people like Donald Trump.
yeah. Without having to worry about some of the because we're part of the official Democratic Party, that puts restrictions a little bit on what some of the things that Democrats abroad can do. Isn't that right?
That's right. I mean, we can't talk about things like foreign affairs because
Mm,
we leave that obviously to the State Department. And we also have American citizens as our members who live in every country around the world. So we
yeah,
have to be quite careful not to do anything to compromise their safety or, in any way try and, you know, overstep a bound, if you will, of
yeah,
what might be something that's being negotiated behind the scenes that we know nothing about, and somehow,
sure.
we say or do something that, foils that. So we're very careful about what we say and what we do. And, I think it's the right thing, although at times it does feel like it limits us in some of the policy discussions that are going on, or some of the
Yeah.
topical things that happen in the news around the world.
Well, that's what the one question, of course, because we're in the UK, that you get every time you appear on media. I get it all the time, whether I'm doing it for Democrats abroad or for another media spot, is what about the special relationship between the US and the UK? And it's like, it's special.
It's special. And it is, but you know what? And again, we don't really comment on it largely
Yeah.
for the reasons that I cited. But I think one thing that is very clear and that we can say, and because we as a party live by it, is we stand by
Mm,
our allies and friends.
yeah.
And so that's about as far as we can go. And, in contrast to what we're seeing right now, I think it's just a reminder that not all parties do stand by allies and friends, and
Yeah.
namely the Republican Party.
And so, in the spirit of that, a question you probably can't answer: do you think you see Democrats abroad then expanding or changing once we um, absorb the states of Canada, Greenland, and Panama into the United States of America?
I'm not going to comment on that, but I'm also not going to hold my breath that any of those things are actually going to happen. So, and that's probably a good thing. I mean, obviously, America's security around the world is hugely important to all of us as American citizens and people of the world and believers in democracy. But I think, it remains to be seen how other countries want to play with Donald Trump's, statements about how he thinks the world should start to look under the banner of the,
Yeah.
52nd, 53rd, and 54th states.
I mean, because I'm not speaking on behalf of Democrats abroad in this podcast. I can say that it does seem very counterintuitive that the man who said he was going to stop foreign wars and make America first, the first thing he's decided to do is launch an imperial presidency. But we can park that as ironic because it doesn't matter what the Republicans do or Trump does. It does because he speaks out of both sides of his mouth, his face, and other parts of his body. Um, the other thing I find that I get asked a lot when I say to people that I'm engaged, I'm trying to get Americans to vote overseas, is like why we do it, why and the fact, and also the additional fact that which is I guess us and I think Eritrea, that is a country that doesn't recognize domiciled status, and we get taxed potentially outside of the U.S. Do you think that's what makes Americans stay engaged is because of the tax liability, or is it just patriotism, or what do you see when you the reasons why people be involved in an organization like this?
Look, I think it's all of the above, right? I think when you step outside of the United States and you really truly understand that it's a big world out there. And
Mm,
as one of our members put it to me one time, that blue passport, is both an opening of doors to opportunities, and it also puts at times a target on your back. And you realize both of those things when you are the one who might be in the minority in some of these countries.
Yeah.
So I think it is, there's a lot of different reasons. Of course, as Democrats abroad, you then also do get hit with all of those realities that you talked about the unfair ways in which Americans living overseas, are the way we get taxed and
Hmm.
how, you know, the difficulties we actually have to go through at times, even just to vote, the fact that children that may be adopted by Americans living over abroad and they adopt a foreign child, that child may not automatically be entitled to citizenship.
Hmm.
I always also say, I've got two sons, right? They left the United States when they were 7 and 4. They're now 20, 25 and 22. Both of them at the age of 18, just like, 18-year-old boys back in the United States, when the time comes, they are registered with the Selective Service.
Yeah.
They can be called upon at any moment in time to defend the Constitution and to defend our country in any wars that happen.
Yeah.
So there's a multitude of reasons why having the right to vote as an overseas citizen is so important to, people when they leave. And
Mm.
whatever brings them to the table, we want to make sure that they understand that they have the right, because a lot of people, there's a lot of misinformation out there where
Yeah.
people don't know that they have the right to vote. A lot of people think, oh my gosh, if I cast a vote or register to vote, somehow, I'm going to get tied up in all kinds of, you know, investigations on
Mm.
did I properly file my taxes or what have you.
Yeah.
None of it matters. I mean, these things we have to continuously work to educate Americans that they have the right to vote. It's been
Mhm.
guaranteed to us since 1986 under a law that was called the uh, Uniformed and Overseas Civilian Voting Act. I'll get it right.
Yep.
UOCAVA. And that voting act has been around, and that right is enshrined in law. No one can take it away,
Mm.
despite, as we saw and are continuing to see today, certain Republicans challenging the rights of Americans living overseas, which includes not only civilians like myself, but our uniformed men and women.
Yeah.
So this is a big deal. And Republicans have woken up to the fact that Americans overseas do vote.
Mm.
We help them as Democrats abroad to vote through a platform called votefromabroad.org. And anyone who is interested, by the way, if they know someone who lives overseas, this is the platform to go send them, and it gives you literally every piece of information you could possibly know or
Mm.
need to know. But, this is a big deal. And the reason why Republicans are waking up to this is because in 2020, we know that it was the overseas vote that turned the election for President Biden in both
Mm.
Georgia and Arizona. He won both
Wow.
states by over 18,000 votes, which were overseas votes. I'm
Mm.
sorry, he won those, if I can correct that. He won those states by over 11,000 some odd number of votes.
Yep.
But 18,000 of those votes were from overseas voters. And so
Right.
we know that overseas voters, in a country that is so deeply divided right down the middle, in
Mm.
these razor thin races, it's the overseas vote that oftentimes turns it.
Yeah.
And, we were hoping that we would have done it again in 2024. We don't know what the overseas turnout fully looked like. We won't get those results until June. But you
Okay.
can bet that we'll be looking at the results to see how we did, and we'll constantly look to see how we can improve and continue to get our messaging out about the right to vote and how to do it.
Yeah. I want to come back to taxes in a second, but just on the note of voting, I think because the thing I was trying to raise awareness about voting and vote from abroad and so on, and I think the campaign that the Democrats and Vote from Abroad put together this year was phenomenal, and we know it was phenomenal because even Trump noticed it and other Republicans noticed it for the first time. And usually when they notice something, it's kind of like good trouble, isn't it? It's like they clearly saw that the message was getting out there. The thing that I encourage people to do is because I would hear, and I'm sure you've heard this, is like, well, I vote in California. California doesn't matter. And I tried to fight that all the time because it does make a difference. And I think the reason why Trump won the popular vote this time is because states like California, people disengaged. Did you feel that happening this time more than 2020?
So I can't say specifically what happened in California. I
Yeah.
don't know, but the broader
Or
point about
California is an
the,
example of a,
as an example, but the broader point is that, well, first off, you are correct that Donald Trump noticed. In fact, he noticed so much that he went through the painstaking efforts of actually putting out a tweet talking about how Democrats abroad were voting and that we were cheating, which of course is nonsense because the process that we have to go through to just cast that ballot is pretty extraordinary. And by the
yeah,
way, in countries that don't have operating postal systems, where we have voters that have to register in a state where you have to actually mail a physical ballot back.
yeah,
In those states, we have people in countries where they spend, 60, 70, $80 to try and get that ballot back on time. So, the idea that there's any kind of widespread cheating is just ridiculous. But again, he tweeted about it because,
yeah,
he saw that our efforts were working. But, to the point about whether people, disengaged, um, you know, there are some people who, for reasons that, related to some of the things that were happening in the foreign affairs sphere, you know,
mm,
we know that there were people who either did not vote or cast a vote for a third party candidate. And, that is their right. It is their
yeah,
right to stay home. It is their right to
of
have
course.
to vote for whomever they wish. But the consequences of doing that are led to where we are today. And
Yeah.
we've got to somehow make sure that people are engaged and they stay engaged and recognize that elections have consequences. And we said that throughout the entire election season. um, and we still have work to do.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, engagement is going to be interesting. I'll come back to this in a second about how people engage now that the battle is on with Trump. Now we're just a week of him being president, and it feels already like a year. It's going to be a long road. Um, with the taxes issue, because obviously there's a lot of people who feel that it's unfair that we're taxed as non-domiciled. So people who aren't living in the U.S., I file my tax returns in the UK, but I still have a legal obligation to file in the US. Now, of course, there's there's thresholds of if I earn under a certain amount, I don't have to pay a tax. There's tax free. And then if I pay taxes in another country, they take that as a tax deduction. So there's ways around it. But a lot of people, I think would want to do away with that. Say we shouldn't be double taxed after a certain amount of time. My fear with that is that then they'll start to make the argument that, well, if we're not taxing these U.S. citizens, they shouldn't have a right to vote. And I worry about that. And have you heard discussions about that, or is that just something I've made up in my my own little corner of the universe?
I wouldn't put it past the Republicans to try and make that argument, but here's the
Yeah.
thing to remember is that Republicans living overseas don't want to be double taxed either. And so
Mm,
the idea that they may also, if there is something where there's a movement to try and take away a Republican overseas vote as well as a Democratic one, you know,
yeah.
they'll be affecting both of them. Now, certain Republicans have said, I don't care, actually. You
Yeah.
can have my vote if I get the financial benefit. But these two things, the obligations and rights of a citizen are set out in our Constitution.
Hmm.
And, the policy side of it kind of sits underneath, right? But we have, as American citizens, the constitutional right to vote. That is, we also have the right to a jury of our peers. We
Mm,
have certain obligations and rights that are derived from the Constitution, which I think put us on firm footing that even if we have this, some resolution to this double taxation problem, which is hugely burdensome to people. And by the way, even if you don't owe taxes in the United States because you don't earn enough
hmm.
to qualify to have to pay, you still have to file a tax return. And
Yeah.
filing a tax return is not easy when you're doing it as an overseas citizen.
Mm,
It's very complicated. A lot of people spend thousands and thousands of pounds trying to file a tax return only to say, I don't owe you any money. So I mean that's part of it. But all these things, and there's other difficulties, right?
yeah.
It, planning for your retirement. there are, banks and investment agencies, they don't want to touch you as an overseas citizen because the amount of paperwork and regulation that sits behind someone who lives overseas because, a post 9/11 era, there's a lot of laws that got enacted to try and stop, funneling of money to terrorist groups outside the United States. Of course, we got caught in the net of that. And so it creates a whole set of problems for us. And most Americans have no idea until they show up, as I did when I came into this country in the UK and found out that I couldn't open a bank account. I literally, it was, we wanted to buy a car. It's like, well, okay, what do we do? Take the bus and go with a bag full of cash? How do you actually do this? And, at the time, I was working for a company whose one of our board members was the chairman of Barclays Bank. And he called me while I was on a business trip. And he's like, hey, I understand, this is now like 8 months after living here. And he said, hey,
Wow.
can I help you? And so
So it's like you had the
took advantage of
connections.
that.
You had WASTA and still couldn't
and
get a bank account.
But even the chairman of Barclays Bank, he's like, this is who I think you should call, and I'm sure they'll be able to help you. This is nonsense. And it still took the full required 1 year of living here before I could actually open a bank account. And
Wow.
it's just crazy stuff like that where you're like, okay, that's strange. You can't get a credit card because you don't have established credit record here. It's just all these crazy things. And this is what Democrats abroad too has been working so hard. And we actually have been working in concert with other organizations to try and create the awareness in Congress that we need help out here. Because this is truly unfair. You can't plan for your kids' education. You can't plan for your retirement. You can't plan for anything. And this is not just, again, I'm in the world of business. And so, but for people who are diplomats, for people who are in academia, for people who just move because of love, all of these things, have a huge knock-on effect of what they can do, and how they plan for their future. And so we have been working really hard, and we have a tax team that is working night and day, knocking on doors in Congress. We've made a ton of progress on this and these other issues that we've been talking about. And we are really hopeful that in the next Congress, we're going to see some real movement on this, because it is, if Donald Trump keeps talking about it's common sense, well, this one falls into the common sense category, and it truly affects all Americans, not just Democrats.
Yeah. Well, from the Republican common sense side of things, what we should be doing is staying in America. That's what we should do.
Yeah,
That would be the response.
Well, except, what? If I'm being really honest, I moved from the US to the UK because I was in the global beer industry. I was selling, beer made in Wisconsin, and helping it get sold all over the world. So, you can kind of say that, stay home. But actually, is that really the right answer in a world where it's a global world?
Wisconsin
you need
beer.
diplomats out there, and anyway.
Yeah.
They say a lot of things, and a lot of it lacks common sense.
Yes, common sense is. There is a phrase about, I can't remember the quote about it. Common sense not being that. Not me. I think originally the phrase common sense was not meant to show something that was smart and intelligent. It was meant to show the idiocy of the masses. So, which I think is the tagline of the modern Republican Party. But Democrats Abroad is part of the Democratic National Committee, right? And currently, the DNC is going through an election campaign to re-elect a new leader, and there's a lot of debate happening. So I don't know if you're allowed to, not necessarily obviously weigh in on a particular candidate, but the direction of Democrats as an organization overall. There's an institutional debate, it seems, going in of how we move forward under this new administration and the energy that's there. I mean, I don't know if because you're in your official capacity, if you can say your thoughts on that, but what direction for the DNC goes forward from here?
Yeah, I think, well, first off, the elections take place on February 1st. So we will have a leader in place. I actually wish that the elections had taken place sooner, because whoever takes on this role of leading the DNC, we've already lost a month, and I feel like we've lost, as
Mm,
I think you rightly pointed out, it feels like we lost a year,
yeah.
and because of the speed at which a lot of the stuff is happening, and we
Because
don't
they'll
have
become,
the
do you think they'll
full
become the face of the
infrastructure.
Democrats once the new DNC chairperson? Because
I
that's a lot
do.
of things. We don't have a leader at the moment because, we don't control either house or, the Senate or the House. We obviously have lost the presidency. So is that what that will give us as Democrats?
I think it gives us, I think what we need is someone who is going to chart the direction of the party and pull the whole party in, a future facing, um, on the ground in the states, and I'll include Democrats broad in that, but
Yeah.
really helping us set up our operations to win. And I think what people don't often realize, yes, the 2024 election happened. By the way, it was a squeaker of a win for the Republicans,
Mm,
right? They may have gotten, all three branches of, or I should say, they got the House, the Senate, and of course the top job. But at the end of the day, they didn't win by these big overwhelming margins. The person who actually
mm,
won by big overwhelming margins and had the same result was President Biden in 2020. However, we are where we are. And I think it's really important to recognize that we have we have elections coming up in certain states, literally in just a few months' time. So my
mhm.
own state of Wisconsin has a state election, which will decide whether or not we maintain the one seat majority on our state Supreme Court, or if we lose it and we revert back to a conservative court again.
Mhm.
So that's a big election in a battleground state. But then fast forward to 2025, it's the midterm elections. The entire House of Representatives will be voted on again, every
Yep.
single one of them, and a third of the Senate. So, we don't have a lot of time to be kind of sitting and thinking about, what went wrong. We've got to do, you know, the analysis and get the strategy in place to build the infrastructure and to build the communications platforms, which, when we started this conversation, you rightly identified, we've got some challenges about where we need to be, and we need to start getting out there, because we know that not only are Republicans out, with messaging that is, not always based in fact or truth,
Yeah.
but they control a lot of the media outlets that where this is getting out, whether that's, Fox News, or whether that is through conservative talk radio,
Yeah.
podcasts, lifestyle podcasters, all that. So that is a big job for whoever comes into the DNC chair role. And I have listened to two of the candidates' stump
Mm,
speeches. And, I think so far what I've heard is that we have ambitious people who know how to do this. And,
mm,
everyone's got their own take on where they'll put their priorities.
yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think everyone understands the weight and the importance of making the choice that will help propel the party forward and unite the party and get us organized quickly. And we've got, in this instance, 425 delegates
Mm.
that will make that decision on behalf of the party. 8 of those delegates are members of Democrats abroad.
Oh,
So
brilliant. Okay.
we have our own say in this, and I'm hoping and praying that we get, this result that we desperately need, and we can get moving fast, because we don't have time to waste.
I mean, isn't one of the guys running the current Democratic Party chair from Wisconsin? Is a
He is.
hometown boy.
He is a hometown boy. Um, I'm not going to get into making endorsements on this one.
Obviously.
I won't. I'm going to
Uh,
play, I'm going to play a
yeah.
politician and diplomatic person here, because I don't get a vote. What I will say is, he's done a phenomenal job in the state of Wisconsin, and
Yeah.
he's done it under really difficult circumstances. In Wisconsin, we had a situation where not only did the Republicans control, at one point, the governor's office, and both houses of our legislature, our state assembly, But, they put into plan an action that was called Project, I think it was called Project Redline.
Mm.
And this Project Redline, it was actually used in all of the battleground states. And Project Redline took all the data, it's a piece of software, and they took all this data and they figured out if they redrew congressional districts, which get redrawn every 10 years after the US Census comes out based on
Hmm.
population, they figured out how they could draw the lines so that they could almost guarantee, based on past voting patterns, how they could, forever going forward, secure Republican votes in those congressional districts. And it
Mm.
happened, and also in the state voting districts. So, he's working against, these, what we call gerrymandered congressional and district voting maps.
Yeah.
And still he's been able to come back with big wins. And yeah, we didn't win. We did not win this time around on the Trump ticket, unfortunately, but we did send back a US Democratic senator. We
Mm.
won other key state races. So, he's done a really, really great job. And he made sure that we had candidates running in every single election that was had in the state. There was no state race that went uncontested, which has
Mm.
been a big problem in the past
Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
states, because if you don't have people running, you can't win.
Well,
So
and it makes the other party have to work harder and spend money and resources. So if they get, yeah, if they could just run unopposed, then that doesn't help either, and it doesn't let people have a choice, which is what elections are all about.
exactly,
Um,
exactly. And, but like I said, but there are other things I could say about the other folks that are running for DNC chair as
sure.
well. They are equally talented. I mean, there is no one that has put themselves forward that, uh,
Yeah.
I don't think we wouldn't
That's
be
a
doing
very,
it.
that's an
So
appropriate and
I will leave
diplomatic
it, I'll
response.
leave it
Yeah.
at
Well done, Kristen. I can see why you've been the chair. Um,
that.
you mentioned something earlier though, that is a little bit of a problem for us, in that you said that the Republicans sometimes don't tell the truth, and unfortunately, I think you misspoke, because the messaging, especially with this administration and Donald Trump, is that they never tell the truth, or very very, if they do, it's a mistake. That I think is one of the core messaging problems that we have going forward. Is that what Republicans have done so effectively is they hammer home the same message, and it helps because generally that message is horseshit, so it's easy to stay on point because they don't have to worry about the truth. How do we simplify our messaging? Because that, I think, is like, defund the police. Well, the message behind that was a very complex, nuanced issue of demilitarizing our police so that we can put things into more social programs and help take the emphasis away from an us versus them. But defund the police was, I think, messaging wise, catastrophic. And I know there's a debate on that. The advertising around, she's for they, them, we're for us, or you, or whatever that message was. How, because we have the burden of truth, I think, and obviously if there was any Republicans listening to this, they would be yelling at the YouTube or the podcast they're listening to. But I mean, do you see that as a problem, or have you seen that as a problem, this messaging
Yeah,
issue?
absolutely. And I think it's actually the core problem.
Mm.
And the, if I take a step back and even just my own experience through this last election cycle, when I look at, how the Republicans controlled the narrative from the outset, they controlled it about what the issues were, they controlled it about
Hmm.
candidates, they controlled it about allegedly what the American population was thinking about all these different things. Again, and as coupled with, the fact that they also controlled the media outlets, there was
Yeah.
tremendous consistency. And it is really difficult to try in a, short interview or a short, article
Mm.
to respond to all of the deluge of things that they are throwing at you, because it comes like a tidal wave, right? There's
Yeah.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 things that sometimes you're like, hold on a minute, how do I start to pick that apart in the short amount of time I have and get out my proactive message about what I want to talk about? It is
Mm.
very difficult. But where I think we fell short is in our ability to communicate simple messages that people could quickly adopt and repeat
Run
over
with.
and over and over again. I did a particular interview, and one of the Republican messages that you heard all over was that, under Donald Trump, his whole first administration was peace and prosperity. It was peace
Yeah.
and prosperity. And I took that as an opportunity to start to draw attention to, you're going to hear a lot about peace and prosperity from these people, but let me tell you what peace and prosperity actually looked like under Donald Trump. And all of that is a distraction technique so that you aren't focusing on what really happened on Donald Trump. So it was this romanticizing of his first administration that, and, again, if you're unconstrained by truth, you can say whatever you want, Donald Trump, literally just stood there and made bald-faced lies that, prescription drugs, they were, reduced under Donald Trump. It's like he had nothing to do with it. So there's just things that I think when we go into the next cycle, we have to stop and say, how do we simplify our messaging? How do we really hone into the insights that we know, because we message test, right? The Democratic Party message tests. There were certain key nuggets that we got out of that messaging, but what we weren't able to do was to be able to effectively respond to all of it, because, as I said, you just have this, this tidal wave of stuff coming at you, and, and then it's almost impossible to respond in a way because you're sucking up all the time responding to that and not getting your own message out. So I think there's not only a messaging problem and a channel problem, but I think there's also, in a way, a need to get every surrogate who is going to be speaking. We call them surrogate speakers, right? People who speak on behalf of candidates. We need to get everybody trained up on how to do this when you're debating in this type of environment, because it's really difficult. And we got to get really creative too. And that is not to say it. I really think it's important for your viewers and your listeners to understand that, when people understood what the Biden and then later the Harris policies were, if it didn't have a name attached to it, if it didn't say Biden or Harris, but like, what do you think about, lowering the cost of all prescription drugs? People loved it. We just never got to the point in the election where we really were able to talk about that stuff. So anyway, we've got got a lot of work to do.
It's infuriating because a lot of the media, both sides things, and says, when Kamala and other people would say, well, look, the Trump administration is going to enact Project 2025. And then they would go, well, Trump says he doesn't have anything to do with it, other than the fact that J.D. Vance, I think, wrote the cover letter, and then all the people that he's now brought into the administration. The guy who wrote Project 2025 is now the Office of Management or whatever. And it's happening. It is happening. It is Project 2025 is being enacted, half of it this week. But the whole media was like, there's articles that, Trump has distanced himself, and we need to they took him at his word when he's a proven liar, which I don't know how you counter that. And I mean, that's the battle going forward, I suppose.
So here's the thing, and this is where I get infuriated, right? So I'm a lawyer by background, and I can't help myself. I actually go and I read the 900 pages of Project 2025. I go and I
I'm so sorry, Kristin.
Supreme Court oral arguments. No, I find that, because I'm a big believer. And by the way, if there are any teachers out there or other folks, encourage people to go and read and listen to original sources of information, because that's actually where you can train yourself to make your own informed opinions about what is and is not actually being said. But what infuriated me, and I continue to talk about Project 2025, because the Republican Party platform, which is, I can't remember now off the top of my head, but let's just say it was like 18 points or something in the Republican Party platform. It is a slimmed down version of Project 2025. And me being me, I actually went out and I took the Republican Party platform, made a matrix, and then could cross-reference every single one of those items in Project 2025 I'm sorry, in the
Mm,
Republican Party platform, I could cross-reference it into something in Project 2025. It's a straight read across. They just
yeah,
didn't take 900 pages to say it. It's all in there. It's the same thing. And Donald Trump could distance himself from Project 2025, but he can't distance himself from the GOP party platform, and they are effectively one and the same. And so
yeah.
I think having that knowledge that this was one and the same, rather than just using a message point that they were able to consistently say, well, he doesn't have anything to do with that.
Mm,
You know, having gone back and compared the two documents side by side, I can tell you that they're one and the same. Some of the language is almost identical.
yeah, of course.
Um, so there
Because
you go.
they're not only cruel, they're lazy at the same time. Um,
But I think we could have done a better job
yeah.
of, as Democrats, of pointing that out, that
Mm,
actually, you know, it's not just, oh, he can distance himself from that, and it's not true because he speaks a lot of mistruths. But really saying, hey, no, I'll read you page 42 and I'll read you page 19. You tell me what, they sound an awful lot alike.
um, yeah, I mean, I agree. We have to get better and have to be more concise and have to reach people and talk to them in a way that they get how it's going to impact their lives. I think that's going to be the battle, but it's so hard with all of the noise that's out there. I'm aware of time, and you've generously given so much of your time already. I guess I know that you're coming to the end of your tenure of being chairperson. Um, as you pass the mantle on, as you pass the baton, have you started thinking about are you going to write like the presidents do, a little letter to be put in the Democrats Abroad UK Oval Office? We have an Oval Office here in the UK, don't we? We have a
I
little
don't think we have an Oval
pseudo.
Office. I think it's called my dining room. But anyway, I don't know.
What as you pass the mantle, what thoughts would you pass on to whoever ends up in the lucky spot that you've been in for the past year or so?
I think what I would say to them is this is a hugely talented and dedicated group of people. You will find no one more passionate, frankly, about voting rights, about, bringing communities together to celebrate the diversity of our party and, just being American. And
Mm,
it is a welcoming group, and take advantage of all of the energy and thoughts and enthusiasm that our volunteers, because everyone in our organization is a volunteer. Take advantage of that and let people pick where they want to contribute and help them fly. We've
yeah,
done so much to try and build on what previous administrations and chairs have done in over our 60 years of existence. And every group has the opportunity to take the organization just that much further forward. And, in light of where we are today, and not knowing even how our democracy will potentially shake out in the next 4 years, our
yeah,
role living overseas where we still have access to quality information, quality news, journalists, we have the ability to speak without fear that our neighbor may, you know, unleash on us. We
mm,
have, the power to influence. And so let's use our platform, let's use our voices in a way that we can make an echo chamber around the globe, not just, in the US, but everywhere. So people know we exist and we get people to understand the importance of encouraging, that American neighbor who lives next door that they kind of hear once in a while at the grocery store or whatever. Ask those people, are you registered to vote? And if you haven't, go to votefromabroad.org, go do it, because this is the way in which we preserve the ideals of a democracy for the people and by the people and of the people.
yeah. It needs it more now than ever. Well, we'll put the links to Democrats Abroad and to Vote from Abroad in the descriptions of the podcast and the YouTube and all those things there, wherever it goes. But thank you so much for your time. It's been great talking to you today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
And are you happy with your first podcast?
Yeah, this was good fun. Maybe I can come back again. I don't know.
There you go. So there we go. That was Kristin. Thank you so much for her to come on as she's ending her tenure as chairperson for Democrats Abroad UK. It was brilliant to talk to her and to learn more about her, to learn more about Democrats abroad and what Democrats can do, or even voters, Americans throughout the world, to have an impact on what happens in our home country. So make sure to check out Democrats Abroad online. And whether you're a Democrat or not and you want to register to vote, go to votefromabroad.org and get signed up. Or if you know people who are abroad, get them signed up too. So thank you to her for coming on. Thank you to Mark, the producer, for putting things together as always. And we will see you next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.